When I bought my first home, I thought the hardest part was over. The loan approval, the endless inspections, the down payment that sucked my savings dry. I figured once I got the keys, I could breathe easy. I was wrong. What nobody tells you, especially when you're a first-time homeowner, is that the real challenge isn't the mortgage. It isn't the lawn work. It isn't even the property taxes. No, the real challenge is your neighbors, or worse, your homeowners association. Now, don't get me wrong, at first glance, my neighborhood looked like paradise. Wide streets lined with old oak trees, kids riding their bikes with chalk-stained knees, retirees watering roses that looked like they'd been imported from Eden itself. And tucked between all that charm, my house, a modest two-story with a porch swing that creaked like it had a story to tell. The catch? This little slice of paradise came with an HOA. For those who don't know, an HOA, or Homeowners Association, is like a mini government for your neighborhood. They make rules, enforce fines, and sometimes decide what color you can paint your mailbox. The bylaws in my community were a full 86 pages long. 86. I've read shorter novels. The realtor downplayed it, of course. "Oh, the HOA just keeps the neighborhood looking nice," she chirped. "They make sure everyone follows the same standards." Standards. That's realtor code for they will crawl into your business like ants at a picnic. And leading the charge in my neighborhood was one woman. A woman who made it her personal mission to remind me daily that I did not fit her vision of this community. Her name was Linda Fairchild. I met Linda on my second day living there. I was carrying a box of vinyl records from my car when I heard a sharp voice behind me. "Excuse me, sir." Now, when someone hits you with "sir" that hard, you just know it's not out of respect. I turned, and there she was, mid-50s, pressed khakis, a blouse whiter than printer paper, and a wide-brimmed hat that made her look like she was either gardening or preparing to interrogate me under a spotlight. "I'm Linda Fairchild," she said, extending a manicured hand, chair of the HOA's Architectural Review Committee. I shook her hand, careful not to crush it. "Marcus Lawson," I said, "new neighbor." Her eyes flicked to the box I was holding. "What's in there?" I laughed lightly. "Records, you know. Music." "Ah," she said, pursing her lips like I'd confessed to owning a meth lab. "Well, welcome to Willow Creek Estates. We pride ourselves on keeping everything orderly." I nodded, already sensing where this was headed. She went on. "The HOA does require that trash bins be stored out of sight at all times, and lawns must be maintained weekly. Oh, and satellite dishes must be approved before installation. Mind you, I hadn't even finished unpacking my bed sheets yet. Appreciate the info," I said, keeping my tone polite. Linda smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile you see on a dentist right before the drill comes out. It didn't take long for the first incident. One Tuesday morning, I rolled my trash bin to the curb for collection. Trash day. Simple enough. But I worked late that night, so by the time I came home, the bin was still out front. I figured I'd roll it back in the next morning. Wrong move. At 6:45 a.m., I woke to a sharp knock at my door. When I opened it, there stood Linda, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Mr. Lawson," she said, her voice sugary sweet, but her eyes sharp. "Do you know what time it is?" I rubbed my eyes. 6:45? It's past sunrise," she said, "and your trash can is still visible from the street." She flipped her clipboard around to show me a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, Section 5.2. Trash receptacles must be removed from public view no later than midnight on the day of collection. "Midnight?" I repeated. "That's oddly specific." She nodded. "It's in the bylaws." Now, here's where my inner lawyer kicked in. I'd actually read the bylaws, maybe not all 86 pages, but enough to know she wasn't lying. Section 5.2 was real, but the way she delivered it, like I'd committed a felony, rubbed me the wrong way. "I'll take care of it," I said. She sniffed. "I should hope so. We wouldn't want to start off on the wrong foot, would we? She turned on her heel and marched away, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a sheriff holstering a gun. That was my first fine. $50 for a trash can. The second clash came a few weeks later. My driveway had a couple of cracks, normal wear and tear. I figured I'd replace it with those nice permeable pavers that help with drainage. So I submitted a request to the HOA, per their rules. 30 days went by, no response. Then, out of nowhere, I got a notice in the mail. Violation, unapproved alteration. The fine, $100. I stormed into the next HOA board meeting, which felt like a scene out of a suburban courtroom drama. There was Linda, sitting at the head of the table, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "your driveway is in violation of HOA standards." "With all due respect," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "I submitted the application on July 10th. According to Section 7 of the bylaws, the board has 30 days to respond. If they don't, the request is considered approved." Her eyes narrowed. She didn't expect me to know that. "That may be," she said coolly, "but cracks in a driveway pose a liability. If someone trips, your homeowner's insurance won't cover it." I almost laughed. "Actually, I have an HO5 policy. It covers liability for injuries on the property, but thanks for the concern." A couple of board members coughed to hide their smiles. That was the first time I saw Linda flinch. Just a little, but enough. Now, let me be clear. Linda never once called me out for being black. She never said anything you could pin down as racist. But it was in the undertones. Like when she said, "We have certain standards here, Mr. Lawson. I just want to make sure you understand them." Or when she complimented me with, "You're very articulate." Or the time she suggested that maybe a brighter house color would be more appropriate for the neighborhood, even though my house was already painted beige. It was death by 1,000 cuts. And I wasn't about to bleed quietly. Over the next few months, Linda seemed to have a radar for anything I did. If my grass grew half an inch too high, I'd get a warning. If I parked my car on the street overnight, there'd be a note on my windshield. One Saturday, I was grilling ribs in my backyard when she appeared at the fence, like some kind of suburban apparition. "Mr. Lawson," she called, wrinkling her nose. "Charcoal grills aren't permitted within 10 feet of the property line." I smiled and held up the bylaw book. Section 9.4 says gas grills. Charcoal isn't mentioned. Her face soured like spoiled milk. The funny thing about tyrants is, eventually, they push everyone too far. One evening, my neighbor, Mrs. Patel, came over with a plate of samosas. "Marcus," she said, "you're not the only one. Linda fined me for having my daughter's bicycle on the porch." Then Mr. Rodriguez chimed in. "She fined me for planting tomatoes in the front yard. Said they weren't ornamental." Before long, it was clear. Linda wasn't just picking on me. She was picking on everyone. The difference was, I pushed back, and people started to notice. I decided to fight back the right way. With facts, with neighbors, and with a little humor. I started attending every HOA meeting. I asked polite but pointed questions. I brought copies of the bylaws and highlighted sections Linda conveniently ignored. I quoted actual state laws when she tried to invent rules. At first, the board seemed annoyed, but slowly I noticed heads nodding when I spoke. People laughed at my jokes. Neighbors started sitting next to me instead of Linda. The tide was turning. I learned fast that with Linda Fairchild, The real battles weren't fought with fists or shouting. No, Linda wielded her power, the way a cat toys with a mouse. Quiet, persistent, claws just sharp enough to draw blood, but not quite enough to kill. After the driveway incident, I thought maybe she'd back off. I was wrong. If anything, she doubled down. It started with the flag. One Saturday morning, I decided to hang a flag on my porch. A simple, black flag with white letters. Do the right thing. Nothing political, nothing offensive. Just a nod to one of my favorite films, Spike Lee's classic. By lunchtime, Linda was at my door, clipboard in hand, as always. "Mr. Lawson," she said, her eyes darting up at the flag. "I noticed your banner." "It's a flag," I said, sipping my sweet tea. "Flags," she said crisply. "Must be the United States flag or a military service flag, per Section 11.2 of the bylaws. Any other banners require prior approval." I raised an eyebrow. "So if I wanted to hang, say, a football team flag?" "That," she said, pausing just long enough to let her disapproval linger, "would be more in keeping with the spirit of the community." I laughed. "So the Cowboys are fine, but Spike Lee isn't?" Her smile was thin. "We just like to make sure the neighborhood maintains the right image." There it was, that pause, that image. I didn't need her to say the quiet part out loud. I could hear it clear as day. A week later, I was trimming my lawn. Now, I'll admit I let it go a few days longer than I should have. Life happens. But it wasn't a jungle, just a little shaggy around the edges. Linda appeared, as if summoned by the sound of my lawnmower. She stood at the curb, arms crossed, lips pursed. "Mr. Lawson," she called out, "the bylaws specify grass height must be maintained at 4 inches or less." I shut off the mower and wiped sweat from my brow. "It's 5 inches, at most." She tilted her head. "It's important for property values. People drive through, they judge a community by how tidy it looks." I nodded slowly. "Funny, I saw the Johnsons' yard yesterday. Their grass was about the same length as mine." She blinked. "Oh, well, the Johnsons have lived here for 20 years. We know they'll take care of it." "Ah, I see. They get the benefit of the doubt. I get the clipboard." The most surreal moment came when she commented on my curtains. One evening, as I was taking out the trash, on time this time, Linda intercepted me on the sidewalk. "Marcus," she said, and I noticed she'd stopped with the Mr. Lawson, like we were old friends now. "I happened to notice your living room curtains. They're quite dark." I frowned. "They're navy blue." "Yes, well," she said, "sometimes darker colors can look a little heavy from the street. We just want homes here to feel bright and welcoming." I stared at her, trash bag in hand. "Are you telling me my curtains aren't friendly enough?" She gave that tight smile again. "I'm just offering a suggestion. You'd be surprised how much people read into appearances." Appearances. Standards. Image. She had a thesaurus of ways to say the same thing without ever saying the word black. The straw that nearly broke me was the street parking incident. I had some friends over one Friday night, old college buddies, loud, laughing, the kind of guys who bring life into a house. We parked 3 cars out front, nothing illegal, nothing blocking traffic. At 9:30 sharp, Linda knocked. I opened the door to find her standing there, arms folded, expression frosty. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "guests are permitted, of course, but overnight street parking is not allowed without prior board approval." I glanced at the clock. "It's 9:30, nobody's staying overnight." She pursed her lips. "Well, I just wanted to make sure. We've had situations before." I raised an eyebrow. "Situations?" "Certain gatherings," she said delicately, "can make longtime residents feel uncomfortable." I leaned against the doorframe. You mean black gatherings? Her eyes widened just slightly. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, I said. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just tightened her grip on her clipboard, muttered, "Have a good evening," and walked away. It would have been easier to ignore her if she were just a nuisance, but the fines kept stacking up. 50 here, 100 there. Trash cans, lawn, flag, curtains, parking. I started keeping a folder, Linda's love letters, I called it. Every warning, every fine, neatly hole-punched and filed. If nothing else, it gave me a sense of control. Still, it wore on me. Every knock at the door made my stomach twist. Every clipboard sighting made my blood pressure spike. It wasn't just the money, it was the principle. The feeling that no matter what I did, no matter how polite or by the book I was, Linda would find a way to remind me that I didn't belong. And yet, beneath the frustration, there was a flicker of something else. Resolve. I wasn't about to let her win. One Saturday, while I was sweeping my porch, Mrs. Patel came over again. She glanced around before lowering her voice. "Linda gave me a violation for my daughter's jump rope being left in the driveway," she whispered. "A jump rope, Marcus. What's next? A fine for breathing too loudly?" I laughed. "Wouldn't put it past her." Then Mr. Rodriguez waved from across the street. She dinged me for my tomato plants again. Said they don't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. My abuela's been growing tomatoes longer than she's been alive. Slowly, stories trickled in. A family fined for chalk drawings on the sidewalk. An elderly couple warned about their garden gnomes. Even the Johnsons, her longtime favorites, got a slap on the wrist for leaving Christmas lights up past January. It dawned on me. Linda wasn't just on my case. She was on a crusade. The difference was, she seemed to enjoy coming after me most of all. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, I was ready. I walked into the clubhouse with my folder under my arm. The room smelled faintly of coffee and air freshener, the kind of space meant to feel welcoming but always felt stiff. A half-dozen neighbors sat in folding chairs, murmuring quietly. At the head table sat Linda, pearls gleaming, posture perfect. She tapped her gavel. "Meeting is called to order." The usual business dragged on. Budget reports, landscaping updates, talk of resurfacing the community pool. Then, inevitably, violations. Linda cleared her throat. "Mr. Lawson, multiple concerns have been raised about your property." I stood. "With respect, I'd like to address those." She blinked, surprised I'd spoken up so quickly. I pulled out my folder and flipped it open. Violation 1, trash cans. Yes, I left mine out overnight once, paid the fine, haven't repeated it. Violation 2, driveway. Submitted an application, never received a response within the required 30 days. According to Section 7.3 of the bylaws, that counts as approval. A murmur rippled through the room. Violation 3, flag. Section 11.2 mentions U.S. and military flags, but nothing about prohibiting others. Federal law, the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005, says HOAs can't restrict display of the U.S. flag, but there's no federal ban on cultural or artistic flags unless they're obscene. Mine wasn't. Linda shifted in her chair. Violation 4, lawn height. Applied equally, fine. But the Johnson's yard was the same length as mine that week. Selective enforcement is not consistent with HOA guidelines. Now she was frowning. And violation 5, curtains. With all due respect, curtains aren't mentioned in the bylaws, suggesting they don't look welcoming. Well, I'll let the room decide what that implies. Silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. I closed the folder. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for fair treatment. Same rules for everyone. Applied evenly, that's all. For once, Linda didn't have a snappy retort. She just pressed her lips together and tapped her pen against the table. The meeting moved on, but I caught something I hadn't seen before. Heads nodding. Neighbors whispering. People glancing at me with something like respect. The tide, I realized, was beginning to turn. As I walked home that night, folder tucked under my arm, I felt lighter than I had in months. Linda wasn't beaten yet, far from it. But for the first time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was on offense. And deep down, I could sense it. This was only the beginning. Because if there's one thing people like Linda can't stand, it's losing control. And I had just taken the first piece of it away. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's this. Some people don't take losing well. And Linda Fairchild? She was the kind of woman who could turn a lost game of Scrabble into a Supreme Court appeal. After that HOA meeting where I quoted Virginia code and made her squirm in front of her little gavel gang, I figured maybe she'd back off. Maybe she'd realize I wasn't a kind of guy you could bully with a clipboard and a passive-aggressive smile. But nah, Linda didn't back off. She doubled down. It started with my truck. My old Ford F-150, black, with a dent on the rear bumper and a steel toolbox in the back. Nothing fancy. Paid for, reliable, got me from A to B. One evening, I came home from work, parked in my driveway, went inside, and started reheating leftovers. 10 minutes later, ding-dong. I opened the door, and there she was. Linda. Clipboard in hand, pearls around her neck like she was headed to a country club brunch. And that smile, the kind that says, "Bless your heart," but really means, "You don't belong here." "Marcus," she said sweetly, "we've had some concerns about your vehicle." "My vehicle?" I asked, though I already knew where this was going. "Yes." She glanced at the truck like it was a roach that had scurried into her spotless kitchen. "Our CC&Rs prohibit commercial vehicles being parked in driveways overnight. Section 7.4. Your truck, well, it gives that appearance. The toolbox, the dent, the general look of it. It's not quite in line with our neighborhood aesthetic." Now, I swear to you, her eyes did this little up and down thing, not just at my truck, but at me, like she was measuring whether I fit the neighborhood's aesthetic. I leaned against the doorframe and said, "Linda, my truck ain't commercial. It doesn't have a company logo, it's not oversized, and it's not a work van. Section 7.4 doesn't apply." She tightened her grip on the clipboard. "Well, it's unsightly." "Unsightly?" I chuckled. "Funny. I don't remember unsightly being a legal term." Her smile didn't break, but her nostrils flared. That was my first clue this was about more than just a truck. Over the next week, I noticed something. Every time I pulled into my driveway, blinds would twitch. Curtains would shift. It was like living on a stage with an invisible audience. And when I walked my dog, I overheard little snippets. "He parks it right there every night. Doesn't blend in, you know? HOA needs to handle it." Now, maybe I'm paranoid, but when you're the only black homeowner on a street full of Lindas, and suddenly everyone's talking about what doesn't blend in, you don't need subtitles to catch the undertone. Then came the orange paper, taped right on my door, bold letters at the top. Violation notice. Unauthorized vehicle parking. They'd actually written me up. I sat down at my kitchen table, unfolded the letter, and started laughing. Because get this, the violation notice claimed my truck violated insurance risk standards. It said, "Homeowners are reminded that vehicles of a commercial nature, or those deemed unsightly, can increase liability risks for the association. For reference, see Virginia Code, Section 38.2-2200 regarding motor vehicle insurance liability." Now, I may not be a lawyer, but I know enough to call BS. Section 38.2-2200 doesn't say a thing about HOA driveway parking. It's a section of the code that basically defines what liability coverage is. Nothing about trucks, nothing about aesthetics. Linda had pulled a random insurance statute like she was hoping I wouldn't check. So I did what I always do. I checked. And then I highlighted. And then I printed out the entire statute and stuck it to my fridge with a magnet that said, "Nice try." When the next HOA meeting rolled around, I came prepared. Manila folder, tabs, color-coded sticky notes, the whole works. Linda opened the meeting with her usual tone, honeyed voice dipped in vinegar. First order of business, Mr. Marcus Lawson's repeated violations. I raised my hand. Before we get into that, I'd like to read something. Virginia Code Section 55.1-1819 again. It clearly says fines must be reasonable and directly tied to damages suffered by the association. Now, unless you can explain how my truck and my driveway damaged the HOA financially, these fines are unlawful. Linda pursed her lips. It's about community standards, Marcus. We can't have the neighborhood looking... She paused, searching for a word, before landing on cluttered. Cluttered, that was the word she chose. Not uniform, not standardized. Cluttered. The other board members shifted in their seats. One of them, a tall, balding guy named Tom, cleared his throat and said, "To be fair, Linda, his vehicle doesn't technically violate the rules. I checked." Her eyes narrowed at him, then flicked back to me. "We'll revisit this." That was Linda speak for, "I'm not done with you yet." That night I sat on my porch, sipping sweet tea, and thought about the day. On paper, I'd won. They couldn't fine me for my truck, at least not legally. But it didn't feel like a victory, not really, because the way Linda looked at me, the way she said cluttered, that wasn't about my truck, that was about me. And the worst part, I could feel it spreading, like her little war against me was infecting the neighborhood. People who used to wave when I walked my dog were suddenly busy checking their mail. Kids who'd waved from their bikes now stared at the ground when they passed my yard. Linda wasn't just trying to beat me with bylaws. She was trying to paint me as the outsider, the one who didn't belong. And that was a battle I knew I had to win. Because if I let Linda Fairchild define me as the problem, she wouldn't stop until I was gone. I wish I could tell you Linda cooled off after that second HOA meeting, that maybe she poured herself a glass of Chardonnay, took a bubble bath, and realized she was out of line. But Linda wasn't built like that. Instead, she started coming at me sideways. It started with the trash cans. I usually put mine out the night before pickup like everybody else, but one morning I walked outside to see a bright yellow violation slip taped to my bin. It said in neat cursive handwriting, "Trash bins must not be placed at the curb before 6 a.m. on the day of collection. HOA Bylaw 9.2. Now, here's the funny thing. Bylaw 9.2 did exist. I looked it up. But it didn't say 6 a.m. It said no earlier than 5 p.m. the day before collection, which was exactly what I'd done. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. She flat out made up a rule. The next week she filed a lawn maintenance complaint, claiming my grass was 2 inches higher than the HOA standard. 2 inches. Like she had been out there with a ruler measuring blades. The week after that, she reported me to the county zoning office, saying I was running an automotive business out of my driveway because I had my nephew over helping me change the oil in my truck. It was harassment, plain and simple. But it was also strategic. She was trying to paper me into submission. Death by 1,000 citations. Her boldest move came one Saturday afternoon. I was in my yard trimming the hedges when a guy in khakis and a polo shirt walked up holding a clipboard. "Mr. Lawson?" he asked. "That's me. I'm with Franklin Mutual. Your HOA asked us to do a liability risk assessment on your property." I stared at him. "A what?" "A liability assessment. It's unusual, but sometimes HOAs request an inspection if they believe a property poses increased risk. They mentioned your vehicle. I swear I laughed so hard I almost dropped my hedge clippers. My truck is now an insurance liability? The guy shrugged. He didn't look thrilled to be there either. They cited Virginia Code 382-2200. There it was again, that same random insurance code Linda had pulled before. She'd actually called my insurance company, waving statutes around like she was Judge Judy. I looked at the inspector and said, "Tell you what, why don't you walk around, see if my Ford is a public menace, and then we'll both go on with our day." He did a quick lap, jotted a couple notes, then gave me a look that said, "Yeah, this is ridiculous." He left, and I thought maybe that was the end of it, but no. 2 days later, I got a letter from the HOA demanding proof of my auto insurance policy within 10 days, or further action will be taken. That's when I knew. Linda wasn't just being petty. She was trying to trap me legally. If I didn't respond, she'd fine me. If I did, she'd find another excuse. Either way, I was on defense. And that's when I made a decision. Enough defense. It was time to play offense. See, one thing Linda underestimated was that I'm a patient man. I'd grown up in Richmond. I'd worked my way into this neighborhood, and I knew how to play the long game. So I started documenting everything. Every violation notice, scanned and saved. Every voicemail, recorded. Every interaction, with dates, times, and notes. I built a little Linda dossier, and then I did some research of my own. Turns out, under Virginia Code Section 55.1-1819C, HOA boards can't enforce selective rules. If they let one homeowner slide, they can't hammer another for the same thing. So I took a few walks, snapped some photos. Put guy on Maple Drive with a work van covered in decals parked in his driveway. To match a lady Tuesday over with her trash cans out all weekend. To match a lady yard on the corner with grass taller than mine, all of it neatly labeled in my folder. Then I filed a formal complaint with the county. Not against my neighbors, but against the HOA itself. I cited selective enforcement, harassment, and misuse of authority. And then, cherry on top, I CC'd every single board member, plus the HOA's management company. The next HOA meeting was different. For one, it was packed. Word had spread about the drama, and folks were curious. I walked in with my folder under my arm, wearing my sharpest Sunday suit. Not because I had to, but because I wanted Linda to know I came prepared for war. Linda started the meeting with her usual spiel, but I cut her off. "Actually, before we start, I'd like to present some materials," I said, placing my folder on the table. I laid it all out. The fake bylaws she wrote on violation slips, the bogus insurance code, the photos of other neighbors breaking the same rules without consequence. And then I dropped the bomb. I've filed a formal complaint with Henrico County. The HOA is now under review for selective enforcement and harassment. If necessary, I'm prepared to escalate to civil court. Under Section 55.1-1819, you'll lose. And when you lose, it won't just be fines on me. It'll be attorney fees, damages, and county oversight. The room went silent. Linda's face turned red. Not pink. Not flushed. Red. She sputtered something about community standards and neighborhood harmony, but by then, even the other board members were side-eyeing her. Finally, Tom, the balding guy who'd always looked uncomfortable, spoke up. "Linda, I think we need to reconsider. It's clear Marcus hasn't violated the bylaws. And frankly, this has gone too far." One by one, the other board members nodded. And just like that, Linda was outvoted. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Not a violation notice, not a fine. An apology. Well, technically it was a formal clarification, but I'll take it. It said the board had reviewed the matter and found no violations on my part. All pending actions were dismissed. And Linda? She resigned from the board. The official reason was to spend more time with family, but everybody knew the truth. She'd lost. That Friday, I pulled my truck into the driveway, cracked open a cold beer, and sat on my porch while my dog snoozed at my feet. Neighbors walked by. Some waved again, like old times. A couple even stopped to chat, asking what really went down at those meetings. I just smiled and said, let's just say, Linda's not running the show anymore. And for the first time in months, the neighborhood felt quiet, peaceful. My truck sat in the driveway, right where it belonged. And Linda Fairchild? Well, she was just another cautionary tale. Sometimes victory doesn't come with fireworks or a marching band. Sometimes it's just sitting on your porch, sipping a drink, watching the sun set over a street that finally leaves you the hell alone. But I'll tell you what, every time I see that dented bumper on my Ford, I grin. Because to me, that dent ain't ugly. It's a trophy.